Hi everyone, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, I really appreciate it. Thank you. In this video, I'm recommending that you watch 3 other videos. Of course, if you're so inclined and you have the time. The links are in this video's box, in the description box. I've put them there. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to remind you that it's very important to gather your news and information from good sources. And I think these 3 sources are good. In fact, I think they're excellent. And indeed, it's entirely possible you've already seen these videos or you're aware in some other way of what I'm about to say. The reason I'm bringing it up is because as I was watching the videos and taking in the information, I could see the astrological correlations that really reveal what is happening from that perspective, including what we need to do, what is important during this very difficult period we are all going through. So the first video is a conversation between Brian Tyler Cohen, who I think is an excellent journalist, podcaster, video creator, and defender of democracy, talking with Jamie Raskin, another very intelligent man with vast knowledge of the law. And they were discussing the open thievery that the orange sleazebag, currently masquerading as president, was attempting to do in regard to that reported now $250 million that he was literally trying to steal from the Treasury. But the reason I say trying to is because what is now known is that he was trying to do it in secret. And because his form of governance and that of his minions tends to be, let's just stab each other in the back at every opportunity, they have a lot of leaking. And so someone leaked it, although it's possible that someone just of a decent nature leaked it, so it might be that. Regardless, we found out about it, and that's why it's public. And so, in the meantime, totally separate topic in the second video, which is by Ben Meiselas of Meidastouch. And that's a site that also tends to carry really good information. It's filled with really smart lawyers who do their research, and they work at it constantly to bring up all kinds of things that the so-called mainstream media either forgets to show us or simply doesn't focus on. And so Meiselas here is targeting the question of his health, which you've heard me talk about ad nauseum in recent months, for sure, especially since the summer when it began to really visibly decline. And he points out that some of what we suspect is becoming more and more clear. We already know that he wasn't getting, yearly evaluations. They were coming more like every 5-6 months, which is concerning. Then we found out about his swollen ankles, and we notice, it's pretty visible. You look at the guy, his mouth is drooping. He is incredibly forgetful now, constantly in low energy states, and often saying unbelievably stupid things, like when he went on this thing about the word cartel and how he knows the person who invented the word, which is preposterous and stupid. And then in another instance, he's talking about getting $130 million from a secret source. And you can see that this is irritating Pete Hegseth. Not that I care or that anybody cares about that, but in other words, multiple signs of decline, to which you add the latest, which was this this revelation that some kind of advanced imaging was happening, and a reporter asked, and the bimbo in charge of the press corps, Caroline Levitt, at first said, well, when you go to the doctor, all people get advanced imaging when they do their evaluations, which is completely untrue. Typically, if you're getting advanced image, it's either because something is broken, like maybe a tendon or a tissue somewhere else, or something is going on that is of deeper concern. When the reporter pressed, of course, as Caroline always does, she brushed it off as there's nothing to see here, look somewhere else. So where's the link here to the astrology? All of this is in that 12th house of his, house that is getting intense astrological pressure, as you will see from my prior videos. I talk about this constantly, the hits on that house that are reflecting the declining health patterns. But that house is also where you commit crimes and basically engage in theft. And you may remember videos that I posted earlier in the year when Jupiter went into Cancer in June. I mentioned that this was going to accelerate his thievery, his secret crimes, because that's what that house is. That house is a house of secrets, but it's also the house of prisons and criminality. And you know that those planets that he has there, he's not doing any of the high end of the house, which would be things like meditation and spiritual retreats. He doesn't relate to that. He's constantly doing the low end, which is, which law can I break today? And so you've got this combination of health patterns and attempted theft, and some theft, yes, he will succeed in carrying out, because that's just the way our system is unfortunately structured until it can be changed. And so that's just what we're living with. But all of this becomes really problematic the more it is known, even if, as Jamie Raskin says, you can't yet completely stop him. The key here is that you're throwing sunlight on the situation. It is being seen. When you combine this with the horrible policies they're trying to push through at the expense often of their own voters, not just Democratic voters, the more you constantly enhance the perception of corruption, the perception that he doesn't really care about the issues that need solution soon, immediately, such as the rising prices, and especially the healthcare issue, which means many people, including his own people, will have their premiums going up drastically, and so on. Now for the third video, which is by Heather Cox Richardson. Excellent, highly recommended source of information. She is an excellent historian and now news reporter. Before I tell you what she said, let's tell you a quick story about one of these parables that you may have come across. The person, man, woman, doesn't matter, that is in the middle of the ocean. You know, these stories are usually enhanced to make them more interesting because they seem so incredibly improbable, but they try to illustrate the point, which is the person is in the middle of the ocean. You know, they're drowning basically. They're about to drown. They're praying to God for help. Please send me help. And then a helicopter comes to try to save the person. The person says, no, I am not going with you. I'm waiting for God's help. And then a boat comes by. You get the drift. 2 or 3 different, safety measures show up to save him, but he says, no, I'm waiting for God's help. Then, of course, the person dies. They go to heaven, and when they reach the pearly gates, they complain. They tell St. Peter, I was praying, but now my faith in God is really shaken. And St. Peter says to the person, but how do you think this works? If you ask for help, and we send not 1 but 2 helicopters and a boat, and you reject the help, how do you think this is going to work? So the point is that you're dealing with astrology, you're dealing with mysterious forces that seem to correlate to what is happening here on Earth. That is 100% true. I live with this all the time and have for many years. I can attest to it 100% that the cycles are real, and yet very mysterious. Why does Saturn's motion have something to do with a pain in my knee, or a stomach ache, or something that happened in my finances, or something that happened in a relationship? Well, it does. It works. But it's also here on planet Earth where we are. So, if we expect something to happen, we have to participate on planet Earth. The vision is one thing, then it has to be made real. So now we turn to what Heather Cox Richarson was saying, which was really a form of encouragement. She too mentioned his declining health and his declining numbers, the tremendous drop in popularity. All that is true, but then she said, people know there are elections coming up in 2026 and 2028 that are critical toward next steps, toward protecting democracy. All that is true. But an even more important focus, more immediate, is that next month, November of 25, there are more than 52,000 local and state elections being held throughout the country, in addition to the two more known key governorships in Virginia and New Jersey. And she said it's extremely important that all Democrats, 50 fire alarm, everyone has to go vote everywhere in order to keep the flame alive, to keep this thing going, to constantly keep it in the air, keep it in the news, that the Democratic energy is fired up, it's engaged, it's in the news, and thereby creates more and more pressure on the current administration. And you can hear pretty clearly that Heather at times can be a little, stark, and some people even accuse her of pessimism, but she generally feels, she has this sense of the logic of history, but she's a brilliantly intuitive person. She constantly points to the fact that a lot of what happens feels intangible, but that increasing morale, increasing focus can make a tremendous difference in the outcome. And here's where you realize that, yes, you can say, look, we're in these cycles. It's true. Now I'm referring to the country and even to the entire world, based on the fact that the planets mirror the positions in the Civil War of the 1860s, as well as during the Second World War. Well, those were key conflicts where something very dark / evil, horrible had to be overcome. It was overcome at the cost of tremendous suffering. If you were an astrologer then and you said, well, look, we have these cycles and I think we're going to get to the other side, yes, that's true, but then if you don't deal with them, they won't go away. You have to engage. That was unfortunately, through a lot of tremendous loss of life. There had to be engagement. Just so today, to say we're in these cycles, I firmly believe we'll get to the other side, because the adage that says history may not exactly repeat, but it definitely rhymes, and the echoes are there, the themes are very similar, the way these planets are aligning, I'm convinced we get to the other side. But it is us that will be doing this. We're the ones that have to participate. So, bottom line, this is to say, let's all vote everywhere, all the time. Locally, any state thing. If there's a vote anywhere where you can back a defender of democracy, do it, and encourage other people to do it. This is where, if you think about it, when we get a high turnout vote in this country, we're lucky if it's less than 2/3. This means that there are many, many people that aren't voting. This was, in large measure, the key way that Trump got himself over the line in 2024. He motivated voters that don't usually vote. They showed up, close election, and then you can tip the scales. This now becomes super important in all elections. The ones this month, or pardon me, November, next month, and of course next year, in November, there'll be some in between as well, and then in 2028. All right, I'll end there, but again, I highly recommend these sources. You will see the links to the videos in the description of this video in the box below. Links there. If you click on them, you can watch them. I will likely be doing more videos before the weekend is over, but if I don't, I wish you all a great, happy weekend.